4:17 a.m. Port of Oakland. Berth 22. A cryogenic reefer container swings down from the deck of the MV Pacific Meridian. 40 feet of insulated steel. Nitrogen flushed. Sealed at -40 Celsius. The forklift operator guides it onto the inspection apron without a second glance. This was routine. Dozens of these containers moved through Oakland every week. Frozen tuna, sashimi grade, bound for wholesalers in Los Angeles, restaurants in San Francisco, sushi counters across California. Except this one wasn't routine. Inside that container, 4.1 tons of cocaine cast directly into the frozen muscle tissue of individually vacuum-sealed bluefin tuna loins. Each loin weighed 40 pounds. Each one looked identical to every other shipment from every other legitimate exporter in the Pacific. The street value, $340 million. And the reason it almost made it through? Standard X-ray couldn't distinguish it. The drug matrix and the fish tissue registered nearly identical density. To the scanner, it was just protein. What broke it was a single number in a temperature log. 4 degrees off. On a pallet, no one had any reason to pull. This is the story of an 11-month federal investigation, a logistics cell operating inside the West Coast cold chain, and the moment one CBP agriculture specialist instinct about refrigeration tolerances unraveled, a $340 million operation spanning 6 states. The container sat in the inspection apron. The operation that would seize it had been running since January 2026, quietly, across 2 federal agencies. And it was about to go from quiet to kinetic. November 12, 2025, the DEA Los Angeles Field Division had a problem. Intelligence from a Sinaloa-adjacent source suggested a new vector was moving product through West Coast ports. The method was unknown. The volume was estimated at multiple tons per shipment. The logistics cell had been active for at least a year, possibly longer. What the DEA knew, the product was entering through legitimate cold chain infrastructure. Refrigerated cargo, the kind that moves seafood, pharmaceuticals, biologics. The kind of cargo that generates mountains of documentation, customs declarations, temperature records, import certificates, and that gets examined, cataloged, and waved through because the paperwork is clean and the cargo is perishable. Cold chain smuggling had been theorized before. Theorized, not confirmed. The problem was detection. Standard imaging struggled with frozen protein. K9 units, trained for loose powder or compressed bricks, often couldn't reach scent through cryogenic sealing. The concealment method, if it existed, was sophisticated enough that no confirmed seizure had documented it. Special Agent Adriana Voss, DEA Field Division, was assigned to the investigation in November 2025. Her background was logistics fraud, not narcotics. That turned out to matter. Her first step wasn't surveillance, it was paperwork. Voss requested import records for all frozen seafood shipments entering Oakland, Long Beach, and Los Angeles between January and October 2025. Specifically, she looked for Panamanian consolidators because that was the one piece of intelligence they had. The source described a consolidator, not a shipper, not a cartel entity, someone in the middle of a supply chain who would aggregate product from multiple sources before containerizing it for export. The search returned one name that appeared repeatedly in the Oakland records across multiple shipments. Consolidadora Maritima del Pacifico, based in Panama City. 12 shipments over 10 months, all to one importer. Pacific Blue Reserve, a California LLC registered in Los Angeles in February 2024. Pacific Blue Reserve operated out of a leased warehouse near the Port of Long Beach, refrigerated units, forklift traffic, shipping manifests stacked on a front desk. On paper, it moved sashimi-grade bluefin tuna loins to Southern California wholesalers. Voss pulled the business registration on screen, 3 listed members on the LLC, 1 address in Beverly Hills, 1 phone number. She dialed it on body camera, got voicemail. No website. One investigative summary later put it plainly, Pacific Blue Reserve had no listed clients, no distribution contracts on file with any of the LA wholesale directories, and no product certifications from the California Department of Public Health required for sashimi importers. It had invoices. Clean, properly formatted invoices for 12 shipments of frozen tuna. That was it. An importer with no clients, no certifications, and no public presence had successfully cleared 12 cryogenic containers through U.S. Customs in 10 months. Voss brought in CBP trade enforcement. CBP assigned Senior Inspector Raymond Delacroix to the joint investigation in December 2025. Delacroix had 15 years in agricultural inspection, specializing in perishable cargo. His knowledge of cold chain logistics was the piece Voss's investigation had been missing. Delacroix reviewed the temperature logs for all 12 Pacific Blue Reserve shipments. 11 of them were clean, consistent temperature records from departure through arrival, exactly what a reputable sashimi-grade importer would maintain. Bluefin tuna for the premium market requires strict cold chain management. Any deviation degrades the product and destroys the commercial value. Legitimate shippers know this and document it obsessively. The 12th shipment, arriving January 8, 2026, showed an anomaly: one pallet out of 14 on the container, a 4-degree temperature deviation during the Pacific transit. Not catastrophic, not the kind of deviation that would trigger an automatic hold, but within that pallet's data log, the deviation had lasted 11 hours during the crossing from Panama to Oakland. Delacroix reviewed the wire transfer summary on the surveillance monitor wall. He flagged the entry immediately. No reputable sashimi shipper tolerates a 4-degree swing on product bound for the premium market, he said in a subsequent federal filing. A deviation that's significant over 11 hours means the product is commercially compromised. No legitimate importer accepts that pallet. They dispute it with the shipper. They file a claim. They document the loss. Pacific Blue Reserve had not filed a claim, had not flagged the deviation, had not rejected the pallet. They had accepted delivery without comment. Delacroix and Voss requested a controlled offload. In practice, the container is pulled from the regular unloading queue, moved to a secondary inspection bay, and examined without alerting the importer. The goal was not to seize the shipment. The goal was information. If the pallet showed nothing, they had a temperature logging anomaly and an importer who didn't care about product quality. Unusual, but not criminal. If the pallet showed something else, they had confirmation of the vector that had never been confirmed before. On January 9, 2026, at 3:02 a.m., a DEA forensics team conducted a covert core drill sampling of 3 tuna loins from the flagged pallet. The drill extracted a core sample from the center of each loin without visibly disturbing the vacuum seal from the exterior. The field test on the first sample came back positive at 20:47 a.m. Cocaine, high purity, estimated 85 to 90% by the field kit. The second sample, positive. The third, positive. Voss was on the phone with the DEA LA Field Division supervisor within 4 minutes. The call lasted 11 seconds. It's the vector. We need the full operation. The container was resealed. The shipment was documented, photographed at the forensic level, and cleared for delivery. Pacific Blue Reserve received its tuna. The DEA and CBP now knew 3 things. The method was real, the product was inside the fish, and the importer, whoever they were, had just accepted a shipment of cocaine-bearing tuna loins without realizing federal agents had already been inside it. The next question, how big was this, and where was it going? If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know what comes next. Subscribe now so you don't miss what follows when the investigation goes from one container to a 6-state grid. Voss watched the drone surveillance feed overhead and gave the word to let it run. In federal investigations, a controlled delivery means allowing contraband to reach its intended destination while maintaining surveillance. The risk is real. The product moves. The agents have to stay close. If surveillance breaks at any point, the shipment disappears into the distribution network and the intelligence trail goes cold. The argument for running it, they had one confirmed pallet from one shipment. They had no visibility into the domestic distribution network, the storage sites, the delivery routes, or the identity of anyone beyond the LLC filing. The argument against 4.1 tons of cocaine per the estimated load of the full shipment was now moving into California. Voss recommended the controlled delivery. Her supervisor approved it. The DEA's position: 2 more shipments, maximum. Document the full network before the takedown. The first delivery moved to a cold storage facility in Vernon, California, an industrial city 7 miles south of downtown Los Angeles. The facility was registered to a company called Pacific Cold Solutions, LLC. It had 40,000 square feet of freezer space. It had been operating since 2019. It had no public clients listed. Surveillance teams set up on February 3, 2026. 3 vehicles, rotating observation posts. Within 72 hours, they had documented 7 individuals entering and exiting the Vernon facility. 2 of those individuals were later identified through license plate and facial recognition as having prior federal narcotics convictions. One name that kept appearing on logistics paperwork tied to the facility, a Nevada-registered trucking broker called High Desert Transport, LLC. High Desert Transport's filed routes with the Nevada DMV showed regular runs between Los Angeles and Chicago, and between Los Angeles and Atlanta. Both corridors were established distribution routes for West Coast product moving into Midwest and Southeast markets. The picture was expanding. What's most surprising about how this network operated isn't the sophistication of the concealment method. It's how bureaucratic the distribution chain was. These weren't people operating in shadows. They were filing paperwork, maintaining registrations, running companies that looked, on the surface, exactly like the businesses they claimed to be. The cover worked because it was real infrastructure, not fake companies with fake documents, real facilities with real employees who, in many cases, had no idea what was moving through them. The second controlled delivery arrived February 19, 2026. This shipment was larger, 16 pallets, not 14. The temperature log on this one was clean. Every pallet with intolerance. Delacroix reviewed the documentation and confirmed what the field test later established. The cocaine was distributed across all 16 pallets, not concentrated in one. The concealment had been refined between the January and February shipments. In January, the deviation in one pallet's temperature log had been the tell. In February, whoever was managing the cold chain on the Panama end had corrected that problem. The logs showed a clean transit. That refinement told Voss something important. There was someone on the logistics side paying close attention to the January shipments processing at Oakland. Someone who noticed the unusually long inspection time and drew a conclusion from it. Not a conclusion that triggered alarm on their end. The shipment had been delivered. No arrests, no seizures. From the network's perspective, the January shipment had cleared without incident. But someone had noticed and corrected. The investigation had a potential leak concern. Voss and Delacroix tightened the operational circle. The number of personnel with access to shipment-specific details was reduced to 7 individuals across both agencies. Communication moved to encrypted channels only. The Vernon surveillance team was rotated to prevent pattern recognition by anyone monitoring the facility. This is the part of federal investigations that doesn't make the press release. The weeks where nothing appears to happen externally and the internal tension is constant. Surveillance teams watching a freezer facility in Vernon, California, 7 days a week, logging license plates, cataloging faces, waiting for the network to show them who it connected to. One detail that stuck during the February surveillance period, a vehicle registered to a Chicago-based freight brokerage was documented visiting the Vernon facility 3 times in 12 days. That brokerage had no listed California clients and no California business registration. It was a thread, not a chain. But threads were what the investigation was built on. By the end of February, Voss had mapped 3 cold storage facilities, 1 repackaging site, a trucking broker, and a web of LLC registrations extending through Nevada, Illinois, and Georgia. The takedown window was opening. Then the investigation got a complication it hadn't anticipated. A 3rd shipment was flagged at Oakland, arriving March 3, 2026. Same consolidator, same importer. But this one had a different customs declaration. The declared weight was off by 400 kilos. Either someone had made an administrative error or the load had been adjusted without updating the paperwork. Either way, the discrepancy was the kind of flag that would draw routine CBP scrutiny regardless of the active federal investigation. Voss had a decision to make in under 2 hours. Pull the shipment under the existing investigation, or allow CBP's routine process to flag it, which would alert the network that something at the port level had changed. She pulled it under the investigation. The 3rd container was seized, documented, and held. Its contents, 4.3 tons of cocaine across 18 pallets. Pure load, no temperature anomaly. Perfect documentation, except for the weight discrepancy that shouldn't have existed. Total product now in federal custody from 3 shipments, enough to establish the scale of the operation beyond any jurisdictional ambiguity. But the network's mastermind was still outside the United States. The Panamanian consolidator behind Consolidadora Maritima del Pacifico had been identified in federal databases as a logistics operator named in 2 prior DEA intelligence reports from 2022 and 2023. Never charged, never indicted, always a step removed from the product itself. His name appeared on no shipment documentation. He used intermediaries for every transaction. The only thing connecting him directly to the operation was a series of encrypted communications intercepted through a court-authorized wiretap, and those communications were in code significant enough that they required 4 weeks of forensic linguistic analysis to partially decode. Getting him into U.S. jurisdiction required a different approach. DEA's Panama Liaison Office, working with Panamanian law enforcement under a bilateral cooperation agreement, developed an approach over 3 weeks in February and March 2026. The plan orchestrated a face-to-face meeting in the United States under the cover of a business dispute over the January shipment's temperature anomaly. Pacific Blue Reserve, under DEA control through a cooperating individual who had replaced the LLC's original point of contact, would contact Consolidadora Maritima del Pacifico to dispute reimbursement for the quality-compromised pallet from January. The cover story was a financial dispute, routine commercial friction, the kind a consolidator would travel for personally if the account was large enough. Nothing in his behavior at the front desk suggested he suspected anything. The undercover surveillance van outside held the feed. And this account was very significant. 3 shipments in 3 months, millions in consolidated revenue. The meeting was proposed for March 18, 2026 in Los Angeles. He accepted. Worth saying plainly, the decision to let 2 full shipments run while building toward this meeting is the kind of calculated risk that federal investigations routinely make and rarely explain publicly. Hundreds of kilos moved into distribution networks during that period. The argument is always that the larger network dismantlement justifies the short-term exposure. That argument is not wrong, It is also not comfortable. The radar tracking display showed the target's position confirmed inside the hotel. The cooperating individual was in place. Agents in the undercover surveillance van went quiet. What the DEA didn't know until March 15, 2026, 3 days before the scheduled meeting, was that the Panamanian consolidator was not traveling alone. Panamanian customs records obtained through the bilateral agreement showed 4 individuals on the same flight manifest as the target. 2 of them appeared in DEA intelligence files. One had prior narcotics convictions in Colombia. One was a financial intermediary with known connections to a Sinaloa-adjacent money movement operation. This wasn't a business meeting, it was a delegation. The DEA expanded the operation. What had been planned as a single-site apprehension in a Los Angeles hotel conference room became a coordinated multi-agency action requiring synchronized execution across 6 states. The takedown was designated Operation Cold Chain. The command structure was established under DEA Los Angeles Field Division with CBP Trade Enforcement as co-lead. Additional supporting agencies, IRS Criminal Investigation, HSI, and DEA field offices in Chicago, Atlanta, and Las Vegas. The operation ran for 11 months before a single door came down. Agents traced the network across 4 states: patient, quiet, and complete deaths. The operation ran for 11 months before a single door came down. Agents traced the network across 4 states: patient, quiet, and complete deaths. The operational plan called for simultaneous execution across all nodes of the network within a 72-hour window, beginning March 19, 2026 at 4:00 a.m. Consider Voss's position for a moment. 11 months of work, hundreds of surveillance hours, 3 controlled deliveries, a legal wiretap that had taken weeks to decode, and now 72 hours to coordinate entries across 6 states, a hotel apprehension in Los Angeles, a CBP hold on 34 containers at Oakland sitting in a secondary queue, and a freezer facility breach in Vernon at -40 Celsius. Undercover surveillance vehicles were repositioned. The window was tight, and agents in the command vehicle ran through contingencies one last time before the clock moved. March 18, 2026, Los Angeles. Century Park Hotel. DEA surveillance picked up the Panamanian consolidator the moment he cleared LAX Customs dash camera footage tracking his sedan through surface streets, agents in an unmarked sedan running a loose follow. He arrived at 2:30 p.m. 4 associates checked into 3 separate rooms on the same floor. Caught on the hotel's own cameras, faces visible. The meeting was set for 4 p.m. in a conference room on the hotel's 3rd floor. The Pacific Blue Reserve representative was a cooperating individual, wired up and working under federal direction, walking in with an earpiece and a folder of documents the DEA had prepared. It lasted 22 minutes. The business dispute was discussed. Terms were proposed. The consolidator acknowledged the January temperature issue and offered a credit on the next shipment. At 4:22 p.m., 3 DEA agents entered the conference room. The consolidator was placed under arrest on federal charges including narcotics trafficking conspiracy and importation of controlled substances. His 4 associates were simultaneously arrested in their rooms by a second team. None of them resisted. The operation lasted 4 minutes from first entry to last arrest. 5 people in custody in Los Angeles. The network itself, still operational. 34 containers at Oakland holding. Distribution nodes in Vernon, City of Industry, Chicago, and Atlanta waiting for a signal that was never coming. The 72-hour clock started. 4 a.m. March 19, 2026. The Vernon cold storage compound was the primary California target. 3 structures. Combined freezer space, 40,000 square feet. Interior temperature, -40 Celsius. DEA SWAT operating in full tactical cold weather gear breached all 3 entry points simultaneously. The entry teams had been briefed on the environmental conditions. -40 Celsius means equipment malfunctions differently. Hydraulic door breaching tools slow, batteries and communication devices drain faster, breath condensation on tactical goggles requires management procedures that don't exist in a standard warm weather entry brief. The team had rehearsed cold environment entry for 6 hours on March 17. That rehearsal identified 2 equipment modifications required before the actual breach. They had made those modifications. Inside the Vernon compound, the first team encountered a reinforced interior door that wasn't on the building plans. The plans, obtained through a city permit search, showed standard commercial freezer construction. The door was steel core bolted from the inside. They had 11 minutes before the synchronized entries at other sites began. Breaking that door without the right tool would have taken longer. The team lead called for a thermal lance. It wasn't in the standard breach kit. One team member had brought it as a contingency tool based on prior cold storage experience. The door came open in 6 minutes. Behind it, A secondary storage area, 40 feet by 60 feet, containing product that had been removed from the tuna loins and repackaged into commercial food-grade containers. 40-kilogram blocks of cocaine in vacuum-sealed packaging, stamped with what appeared to be legitimate food processing labels. Under a false floor, under the walk-in freezer's secondary section, $18 million in U.S. currency stacked in insulated thermal cases. The cash was cold, -20 cold. Whoever had designed that storage understood that temperature-controlled cash complicated forensic tracing of bills. The Vernon compound yielded 11 arrests, 7 of whom were on-site employees. The other 4 had arrived within the hour before the breach, possibly alerted by something, though post-arrest analysis never confirmed whether they had been tipped or simply unlucky in their timing. Simultaneous to Vernon, CBP executed holds on 34 containers at the port of Oakland, all containers associated with Pacific Blue Reserve import history over the preceding 14 months. 34 containers. Combined estimated content. A mix of legitimate and compromised product, the full extent of which required 3 weeks of systematic forensic examination to determine. The City of Industry site, a sushi supply wholesaler operating as a legitimate business with a significant but not exclusive narcotics repackaging function, was entered by DEA agents at 4:03 a.m. 2 individuals were present, both arrested without incident. Chicago HSI field agents arrested the high desert transport broker at his home at 6 a.m. Central Time. A secondary search of a warehouse associated with the broker on the city's west side yielded 18 kilos of product and $1.4 million in cash. Atlanta, DEA and local law enforcement executed a warrant at a cold storage facility in a Fulton County industrial park. 1 individual arrested, 2 freezer units containing product that matched the Pacific Blue Reserve chemical signature. Las Vegas IRS Criminal Investigation executed financial warrants on accounts associated with 3 Nevada LLCs tied to the network. Account seizures totaling $7.3 million. In 72 hours, 19 arrests across 6 states, $340 million in estimated street value seized or confirmed as previously distributed, $18 million in cash recovered from the Vernon compound alone. 34 containers held at Oakland. What do you think? Did the cold chain method expose a fundamental failure in port inspection infrastructure, or was this an inevitable gap in a system never designed to screen frozen protein at the molecular level? Drop your answer below. We read every comment. The arrests were made. The product was seized. Then the forensic accounting started, and what it found changed the scope of the investigation. The Federal Financial Forensics Team, working through IRS CI, began tracing the revenue flow from the Pacific Blue Reserve operation backward through its LLC structure. What they found was not a single layer of financial insulation. It was 7. Pacific Blue Reserve paid Consolidadora Maritima del Pacifico through a Panamanian holding entity. That entity received funds through a Belize-registered financial services company. That company's accounts were managed through a Dubai intermediary with correspondent banking relationships in 3 U.S. financial institutions. Agents laid the documented transfers across the evidence collection scene, 14 months of wire records, $490,000 increments, $47 million in total. Every transaction had cleared compliance filters, every number had been kept just below the automatic reporting threshold. The stacks of printouts covered the table, the forensic team's most significant finding. The financial architecture had been designed by someone with formal banking or financial compliance experience. The structuring was not intuitive, it was professional. The real question this case raises isn't how 4.1 tons of cocaine moved through a U.S. port inside frozen tuna. It's what it tells us about the regulatory gap between food safety inspection and narcotics detection in cold chain logistics. The USDA, FDA, and CBP each have jurisdiction over different aspects of frozen food imports. The temperature log that broke this case was a CBP agricultural flag, not a DEA narcotics trigger. The system that caught this was not designed to catch this. It caught it anyway, through one inspector's expertise. We went through the CBP agricultural inspection protocols filed in the federal case record, and one footnote kept pulling our attention. It noted that temperature deviation flags in frozen cargo inspections are resolved in the majority of cases by documentation review, not physical sampling. If Delacroix had followed standard protocol on the January shipment, the core drill sampling would never have happened. Standard protocol would have cleared that container. The trial proceedings for the 19 arrested individuals are ongoing as of this reporting. The Panamanian consolidator, the highest-ranking individual in U.S. custody, has entered a not guilty plea on all counts. His defense has filed motions challenging the legality of the January controlled delivery on grounds that the core drill sampling constituted an unreasonable search absent a warrant specific to that physical inspection method. Federal prosecutors have argued that CBP's authority over agricultural inspection at ports of entry provides independent legal basis for the physical sampling. That argument will be tested in court. Sentences for the other 18 defendants range from negotiated pleas carrying 8 to 15 years to contested charges that remain unresolved. Here's the detail that stayed with us after going through this case from beginning to end. The temperature deviation that broke this, 4 degrees over 11 hours, was not an accident. It was a consequence of the cocaine casting process. When you embed a drug matrix into frozen fish muscle, you change the thermal properties of that tissue at the microscopic level. The cocaine-bearing loins didn't hold temperature the same way pure fish did. The physics gave it away. Whoever designed the method got almost everything right. They missed the thermodynamics. Comment yes or no. Do you think a second network using a refined version of this method is already operational? The evidence collected at the scene told part of the story. The rest was still being assembled. 3 individuals identified in the surveillance footage at the Vernon compound were never arrested. They were not among the 11 taken into custody during the March 19 breach. Post-arrest interviews with multiple defendants have not produced identification of those 3 individuals. Agents at the surveillance monitor wall pulled wire transfer records layer by layer, 7 correspondent accounts, a Dubai intermediary that kept surfacing, 2 banking relationships already shuttered by the institutions themselves, but no criminal referrals filed, no U.S. bank named in the charging documents. The trail went cold on screen, flagged folders open, cursors blinking. The City of Industry wholesaler, which operated as a legitimate sushi supply business alongside its narcotics repackaging function, had approximately 200 employees at the time of the March 2026 operation. Fewer than a dozen have been linked to any awareness of the operation's narcotics component. The remaining employees, many of whom had worked at the facility for years, lost their jobs when the facility was sealed pending the federal investigation. The demand side of this supply chain was not addressed by Operation Cold Chain. The distribution routes into Chicago and Atlanta connected to retail networks that remain active. The network is dismantled at the supply and logistics level. The market it served continues operating. A case file this size, this jurisdictionally complex, with financial structures this sophisticated, does not close when the arrests happen. The forensic accounting work is projected to run through late 2027. The highest level court proceedings will likely extend beyond that. Consolidadora Maritima del Pacifico's Panama City offices were closed within 48 hours of the March 18 arrest. The building's lease had already expired. Whoever had been managing the physical operations of that business had already vacated. They knew before the arrest. Subscribe for the next case before you close this tab. We have 3 more operations coming in the next 2 weeks that connect to the same West Coast cold chain infrastructure. The network was bigger than one importer and one consolidator.